Hello, you're watching Proactive. I'm joined by Immunic Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andreas Müller. Andreas, very good to speak with you. Yesterday, you announced the start of an investigator-sponsored phase 2 clinical trial with your lead asset. Can you tell us more about the trial overall?
Yeah, hi Stephen. Good to talk to you again. Yes, we are very excited about supporting a investigator-initiated trial. So this was a group of German investigators who had received a grant from the German government, and the German government is interested to identify better treatments for patients with post-COVID syndrome. I think we called it long COVID during the pandemic, but it's now called post-COVID syndrome, PCS. They were looking for ideas in terms of what treatments could be effective in post-COVID syndrome and PCS. And they had approached us because vidofludimus calcium, our lead asset that we testing currently in phase 3 clinical trials in MS, is a broad spectrum antiviral drug. And we had actually used it during the pandemic to do a COVID trial. And we had seen that it also influences the clinical outcome in COVID-19 disease. So these investigators approached us and with the idea that we could test this in post-COVID syndrome as well. And we were happy to provide this because it has some overlap with our own studies in multiple sclerosis. I think similar symptoms like PCS, in particular fatigue, play a crucial role in multiple sclerosis patients. So that's why we were happy to support this. And yesterday, the first patient was randomized, and we hope to get some supportive data, basically linking virus reactivation and fatigue from this trial as well, that mirrors what we are doing in multiple sclerosis.
How did the University of Frankfurt make the decision to include vidofludimus calcium in the trial, and what makes your drug the perfect choice?
Yeah, so first of all, we had a little advantage with these investigators because our coordinated investigator for the COVID-19 trial that we did during the pandemic for vidofludimus calcium is also the principal investigator for this investigator consortium. And they approached us because we had tested, as I said, vidofludimus calcium in COVID-19, and we had actually done a patient questionnaire survey um, after the trial was done. And because at that time, long COVID really, I think, appeared more on the horizon for the medical community. And we had seen that the proportion of patients having fatigue as long COVID syndrome was much less in patients who had received vidofludimus calcium versus placebo in our COVID trial. So this was not a post-COVID trial. This was really a treatment of COVID, of hospitalized patients with COVID during that time. But it hinted that there is something with this drug that decreases fatigue in these patients after COVID infection. And we also know that this drug is a broad spectrum antiviral drug. It basically doesn't target a virus or a family of viruses. It targets the human cell. Viruses don't have their own mechanism of replication. They actually depend on a human cell, hijacking a human cell and using our own mechanisms in the cell, enzymes, whatever mechanisms you have in the cell, to basically replicate. And what vidofludimus calcium does, as one of the effects that it has in the human body, is that it blocks the ways viruses replicate in a human body. So that's why it doesn't really matter in a large sense what viruses attack the human cell. It has the same effect on the replication of viruses, and that's why it makes it the perfect choice for this. The data that came out in PCS and especially fatigue in PCS over the last years basically said that some of or most of the fatigue in PCS patients is related to the reactivation of viruses that is caused by the COVID-19 infection, or that the SARS-CoV-2 virus basically decreases the immune surveillance in the body so that other viruses that sleep in your body, sleeper viruses, and in particular Epstein-Barr virus, reactivate. And when those reactivation occurs, it often results in fatigue. So PCS patients with fatigue have a much higher incidence of EBV virus, for example, reactivation versus PCS patients without fatigue who don't have this reactivation. And therefore, there's now a strong connection between the virus reactivation and fatigue. And using a broad antiviral drug like vidofludimus calcium, with also the data that we already have from our COVID-19, makes this the perfect choice for this group of investigators.
You mentioned Epstein-Barr virus, and your press release said that the study will also collect data from EBV and related fatigue symptoms. Why is this relevant?
This is absolutely relevant to us. Yes, about 2 years ago, there was a large study with data from millions of US military personnel that basically provided the proof that the Epstein-Barr virus infection is a necessary element of developing MS in patients. So in a more simple way, you could say EBV causes MS. It's not really true because there's an interaction with a insufficient immune response that you have to have, because only few patients, of course, who have EBV infection get MS. So EBV now is really the culprit in MS, and we also have now increasing data that EBV reactivation plays a higher role in MS patients and probably contributes to the disease in terms of disease progression and also in fatigue in MS, much more so than we thought. And therefore, I think we in our clinical trials are really measuring EBV reactivation in MS patients and also fatigue. And we hope that we, with our treatment, can influence EBV reactivation and fatigue as one of the differentiators of this drug in MS patients and in the MS treatment universe, because fatigue is one of the most prevalent and is the most devastating symptoms for MS patients on top of the neurological symptoms. And this would be really a huge differentiator for us in the MS market. So to have additional data, yes, in a different patient population, PCS patients, but where we collect EBV reactivation and its connection to fatigue in these PCS patients would be very supportive for us, for our efforts to really establish vidofludimus calcium as a differentiated product, especially when it comes to fatigue in MS patients as well.
So the Rapid Revive trial announced yesterday could also have a read-through to your MS program.
Absolutely. We think that the mechanisms of EBV reactivation causing fatigue in these PCS patients is likely a very similar or the same mechanism that causes fatigue in MS patients, because EBV is the virus really plays a very dominant role in MS, as I pointed out. So we believe it could be very supportive and has a read through to our MS program. That was really, I think, the reason why we supported this trial and provided study drug to these group of investigators.
Andreas, could you remind us again, please, about the next important catalyst for your vidofludimus calcium MS development?
Yes, I think we have what we believe a very important catalyst in the development of vidofludimus calcium coming up in the near future. This is in April 2025, so a few months from now, where we are looking at the readout of our phase 2 study in progressive MS. Progressive MS is a proportion of the MS universe that really doesn't have many treatments yet, and there's a high unmet medical need. And the reason is really that the existing MS drugs in relapsing MS really don't have any effect or very little effect in progressive MS. And so it leaves the progressive MS patients without a lot of choice in treatments. And our drug, vidofludimus calcium, also has a neuroprotective effect, and we believe that it is very relevant to progressive MS and the pathophysiology disease processes in progressive MS. We actually had done a interim analysis of this phase 2 study in progressive MS, the CALLIPER trial, last October, and published the results, which showed that the blood-based biomarkers really had shown a very strong effect of active treatment versus placebo. And so we're very much looking forward to whether this biomarker result in the interim analysis now also converts to an advantage of this treatment versus placebo for other endpoints, including for confirmed disability worsening, for brain atrophy, and for many other endpoints. And that would really make a huge step forward in the treatment of progressive MS. And that's why we are very excited and looking forward to April 2025.
We look forward to discussing those with you in April 2025. Andreas, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
That's Immunic's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andreas Müller.